Welcome to the Create the Life You Want podcast, where we break down the journey of people just like you going from dream to ownership in business acquisitions, franchises, and startups. I'm your host, Jeremy Ames. Today's episode is brought to you ad-free by Guidant Financial. Guidant is America's leading company helping aspiring entrepreneurs use retirement funds to buy or start businesses. If you're committed to buying or starting a business, you can find out more about your funding options by going to www.guidantfinancial.com. That's Guidant financial.com. Now, let's get started with the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Create the Life You Want podcast. Today, I am joined by Ann Ulrich, and I'm excited to get into her story a little bit because she opened a restaurant and bar, which is the business model that everyone tells you absolutely do not open. So we're going to understand a little bit from Ann about why she decided to make that crazy leap and what she's learned in the process of doing so. So Ann, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Well, Ann, I'm curious, can you tell us just a little bit of background about you? What did you do in your former life before you became an entrepreneur? And what planted the seed or the bug for you to go down this path?
Sure. So I guess, it's been a while now, but after I finished college and getting my master's degree, I actually went in to work for the federal government for about 8 years. My husband and I were living in Washington, D.C., and I was building my career in the federal government, and he's a chef by trade, and he's actually from Austria. He's from Vienna, Austria, and was raised there. And in their education system, they have to choose either a career path or a university path at the age of 14. And so at a very young age, he sort of had to make a critical decision about which life path he was going to choose. And he went down the trade route and went into culinary school and kind of became a chef, and was working in a number of different restaurants, and was working in a hotel actually when we met. And then when we moved to Washington, D.C., and I was sort of building my career in the federal government, he was building his career working for a large catering operation. We sort of, he was building to sort of a partnership level with his company, and it never really materialized. And I was sort of getting a little bit tired working in the government. And anyway, long story short, we ended up moving back to Minneapolis, which is where we met, and which is where I'm from originally. And we decided at that point that he decided at that point really that he wanted to do something on his own and kind of branch out and just test the waters to see what it would be like to work for himself as opposed to working for someone else. I, however, stayed for financial security reasons. I stayed, I quit the federal government, but worked for a number of different big corporations. And while I was doing that, we were launching his restaurant. And that was about 15 years ago. And that was our first restaurant. And it was an organic farm to table style restaurant where we wanted to bring something to the suburbs. We actually live in one of the suburbs of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we found it difficult, especially with, having kids, to be able to go out to eat and find something healthy that either wasn't fast food or chain food. And so we really, in some ways, did it for ourselves. We wanted to build a restaurant that we ourselves would want to be patrons at. And that was kind of the impetus for, starting it in the suburbs as opposed to somewhere in the downtown area. So we had a good run with that restaurant. It was in a local neighborhood near where we live, and we were there for about 10 years. But we were renting, and we kind of decided at the end of our 10-year lease, like, why don't we do something that's, why don't we buy a building instead of just continuing to rent? And so that's kind of when the rollover started with everything, so that we could have access to the funds that we needed to actually buy our own building. And there was kind of an overlap between closing down the first restaurant, finishing our lease, and then ramping up the second one in a dilapidated old building that we ended up, gutting and renovating and kind of building from scratch. So that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years.
Interesting. So, first restaurant 15 years ago, you sort of scrap it together with you continuing to work, and then your husband opening the restaurant. You
That's right.
lease, and when you get to the end of the time period, what really drove the consideration of the buying the building and making a change?
Yeah,
Because
I
you also
think
changed the concept too, correct?
a lot of things happened. Well, with our lease, we had always found that um, that we were paying for everything in anyway. Sort of all the mechanicals and the way commercial leases are written are such that you, as a tenant, typically end up bearing the costs of all the repairs, a lot of them inside and outside of the structure, and we just felt that we weren't building any equity in the, maybe in the business you're building a little equity, but in we felt that there was a lost opportunity, that we could have been building equity in a building in commercial real estate at the same time as building equity in a business.
Yeah.
And it just kind of our lease was coming to a natural close, and we didn't want to be beholden to another 5 or 10 year lease. COVID hit. It was 2020, and we kind of always knew that we were going to have an off ramp, of getting out before the pandemic happened. We kind of knew, like, we're at the end of 2 5-year terms, and it really just doesn't make financial sense to sign up for another 5 to 10, such a long haul in a lease. So yeah.
So I'm curious. I mean, I know enough about commercial real estate to be dangerous, and the tenant improvements for restaurants are incredibly expensive when you think about all the stuff you have to do to code to be able to vent things appropriately and drain appropriately. So when you thought about doing this real estate thing, it's a cool idea, but how intimidating was it when you started to actually get into the brass tacks of what it was going to take to make it happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, well, in some ways, we've been down the road before with a build out, because we had to build out with the first restaurant. We had the benefit of sliding into a restaurant that had folded. And although it wasn't really a full restaurant, it was like a deli marketplace, but then it was like a wine bar on one side. And so we had a little bit of infrastructure there that lent itself to food service. But by and large, we ended up gutting that too, and rebuilding that. And so, and we were lucky. We had a little bit of tenant improvement from the landlord on the first one. So we'd been down that road a little bit, but I think starting from scratch is a whole new animal. And I think it coupled with ignorance is bliss, and it's sort of like you don't know what you don't know until you get into it. It was fun. I mean, it was a lot of stress and a lot of, like, timing and deadlines, and um, uh, just things that you never thought you'd learn about, sewer access charges and sewer size pipes, and, just everything. Um, but it was a huge learning experience, and I like doing that kind of stuff, project management and um, development stuff, and it was fun. But yes, extremely cost prohibitive. Yes,
Yeah,
a lot of
so
cost there.
walk us through how, when you were making the decision about doing this, how you estimated your costs, and then tell us how far over budget it actually was and what you learned from the gap between those two.
Yeah. So estimating, it was interesting. I mean, we did have a lot of costs that we were able to sort of revisit from the first build out, learning, like, that, well, this is what the sewer access charges were when we did this back then. And this is what the hood system cost back then. And this is what the beer system costs. And so we had a little bit to go on. But it was a huge process of just first building your business plan, and then really just going after all the components that you need. And really, you end up getting to a certain point in the process where you realize that the menu that you're going to have drives absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And you really have to nail that down early on. You have to know what your concept is and have that really baked before you launch into construction. Because if you create a menu that's pizzas and salads, for example, well, then you obviously don't need a grill, and you don't need so everything is driven off the menu. And so we tried early on to really hone in on what is our menu going to be, how can we firm that up, how can we be as confident about that as possible, so that we don't get into a lot of equipment changes and construction changes and kitchen changes down the line.
Yeah, so you mentioned business plan. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about like how formal of a business plan did you use and what kind of things did you focus on in your planning stage? Sounds like the menu was obviously a critical part of that, but what else?
Yeah, definitely. The business plan was something. I mean, it's a key document. It was very structured. It was something that was very tight and had to be well written. It was for the bank. We got an SBA loan. And so their requirements demand that you have a very rigorous business plan. I leveraged a little bit of what we had from the first go round, because from the first restaurant we had an SBA loan as well. And so, when you're working with a template, you can kind of, it's not like starting from scratch. But with this concept, it was a different concept. So it did have to be written differently, and some of the financials were different. But I think the tendency, you kind of, while you're writing the business plan, I think the tendency is to um, be optimistic about your goal, about what you can achieve revenue wise, what you can achieve with your cost of goods. The hard part is really being realistic with yourself and saying, are you really going to achieve that in year one? Are you really going to see those numbers? Are you really going to see that numbers, that many people? Are you going to do that many covers? Are you going to, are those realistic costs? And you don't know what you don't know. We didn't know COVID was going to happen, right? So
Yeah, so how do you figure that out? I mean, I got to think it was probably different the second time for you than the first time. So maybe if you could take us in the
yeah,
way, way back machine of your first business plan when you really don't know what you don't know.
yeah.
How did you figure out the assumptions you used?
Well, you build it from a day by day, like, are you going to be open for breakfast? Okay, from what hour to what hour? And then you break it down into chunks. And like, if you're open from 8 in the morning until 11 a.m. for breakfast, that means you've got 3 hours. How many people do you realistically think you can get in the door in 3 hours? And in those 3 hours, say you think you can get 80 people in your door, how much are they going to spend on average? What's the average guest check cost? Are they going to spend $8? Are you just a coffee place? Are they getting a coffee and a muffin? So it's like $8 to $10, or are they getting a full on breakfast and it's $16 to $20? So you have to create tons of spreadsheets and just figure that out day part by day part of numbers of people walking in your door multiplied by the average spend. How much are they going to spend? Build your projections over the course of the days, the weeks, and the year, the months and the year. And then layer on top of that your costs, like everything from paper towels to toilet paper to, food products and utilities, and build in maintenance costs, and, everything under the sun, right? Restaurants are complicated animals because you have 80 vendors, and you're paying, and you have staff, and you have payroll, and you have tips, and you have, it's just very complicated compared to, say, like I don't know, even just a coffee shop where you're just dealing with sort of a finite set of um, costs of goods.
Yeah, a lot of moving pieces.
A lot of moving pieces.
So I'm assuming your husband had some expertise in that given his role in doing catering and running other restaurants. So how did the
Yeah.
two of you team up? I'm picturing you as the spreadsheet person interviewing him under a very hot lamp to twist out from him some assumptions to put into this plan.
Yeah, I mean, he's a rare chef in the sense that his skill set is not only creative and culinary, um, but he also has a head for finances, and he also has a head for and he's very conservative business wise. And so um, I think the tendency in the industry, from all the places I ever used to work before I, went to college, it was all being a server, and it was, the tendency is that what you see is that creative side of the kitchen and the chefs that work in the kitchens. And but I think that really good chefs end up excelling when they have a handle on both the business side and the creative side. can kind of blend those two together. Um, so I think he brought that skill set of knowing what things cost and what things should be, what you need to charge people, and what what ratios, what's your profit margin supposed to look like on this particular product. What I brought to the table was more that I came from consulting. I came from big consulting companies, and I came from more of a 30,000-foot view. Yes, knowing how to put together lots of PowerPoints and knowing how to put together lots of great spreadsheets and everything. So those were the kinds of skill sets that I brought to the table. And in a prior life, all through high school and college, I guess I had worked in restaurants. So then I kind of took over the HR and the marketing side of things as well. And then I'm managing the front of the house operations. Well, he just sticks to more the back of the house and the food.
Yeah, what was the biggest surprise or biggest lesson for your first restaurant opening 15 years ago?
Hmm. Biggest lesson, probably, I think HR is really something that we underestimated as something that how much time and energy and how much of yourself as a small business owner needs to be, and maybe in any business, um, you really need to dedicate a lot of time and energy to the people and and your employees, and really nourishing that relationship between you and your employees and your business, and making sure that it functions really well and healthy and is a healthy relationship. And I think that if you don't, or if you ignore it or slip or don't dedicate as much time that you need to it, it can snowball, and it can be a bigger um, thing than what it needs to be, I guess. Maybe that's not, and that's not necessarily the only lesson. That just maybe popped into my mind as something that I think the people part of it is just really important. Um, businesses, it's obvious you need to make your margin, you need to make your numbers. Those are obvious things, right? But I think what often gets overlooked is how important your employees are to the success of your business. You know.
And what about the biggest lesson for you in the second phase of this project when you rolled out a new
Mhm.
a new concept in a building that you owned and renovated? What was the biggest lesson of that new challenge?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it has to be that you have to plan for like really bad things to happen, because they did. The pandemic, we opened on March 1st, 2020,
Oh,
and we were open for 9 days, 9 glorious days we were open, and then it was just, it threw the whole business into a tailspin, and it literally turned, everything upside down for everybody. And I think that the biggest lesson that we had was that you have to stay nimble, you have to stay flexible, you have to stay ready to totally throw your business plan out the window,
yeah.
which we did, just, well, throw that out the window. That doesn't work, like you can't earn money doing what you said you were going to do. So you had to flip it upside down. And so I think the biggest lesson is, if I were ever to start another business again, it's really like plan for that rainy day. Like
Yeah.
really, truly, don't just give it a nod, but like put pen to paper about like what's the worst case scenario that could happen, and how are we gonna react to that bad situation,
Yeah.
you know, because
Well,
it could be another
obviously,
pandemic, it could be something totally different, right?
yeah, well, obviously you guys survived. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what did you do when you threw that business plan out the window 9 days into opening when COVID hits? You have no idea how long this is gonna be true for, and I'm sure for years you had some fluctuating
Yep.
impact on demand. So what did you do? How did you have to evolve? And,
Yeah.
looking in hindsight, are there things that come up for you where it's like, oh, it was really smart that we did this, or thankfully we had
Mhm.
structured something this way up front that ended up benefiting us in the long run?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing that we did, which all restaurant owners did, was, we pivoted to takeout. We weren't allowed to have people inside the restaurant, and so it was quickly all about creating menus for turning ripping the menu up and recreating a menu that was shorter, and lent itself to food being put in a box and being ordered. Thankfully, we had a really great. Thankfully, we started and launched the business with a really great set of technology, and so we were fortunate that we had an online ordering system already in place, and we could, leverage that to really our benefit. Whereas I think about a lot of the mom and pop shops that maybe didn't have, online ordering capabilities. And, I think that, yeah, they were probably fielding phone calls, but it definitely made our lives easier that we had online ordering already in place. Um, it was sad, but it was, rip up the schedule and everybody had to go home. And so you change your staffing, the staffing model changed, the menu changed, the hours of operation changed, everything really just about it changed, and it kept changing. It didn't stay, and I think that was what was really probably. It's one thing to say like, oh, the environment's changed, let's us change, and now we're good. But it just, as you know, it kept
Back and forth.
back and forth and changing, and people were ripping their hair out. But yeah, I think I forgot the second part of your question. You had asked like what.
Well, you gave one example with the technology of things that, as part of your original plan, ended up being critical in helping you manage this unexpected risk, right? Because no one knew
Yeah,
COVID was going to happen, or that was even a legitimate
yeah,
thing that could
yeah.
happen.
I think also the other along kind of tail dubbing into the technology, what really helped us was that because we had owned the prior restaurant, we brought with us our database of customers,
Uh,
and so we had a really healthy database of emails and phone numbers and loyal customers that were patronizing our restaurant in our in our rented location, and the two places are only about 2 miles apart. And so we were very lucky in the sense that we were able to communicate with them, with our audience pretty readily. It was a little bit of a struggle because even though our locations are only 2 miles apart, it was a completely different demographic. We moved into where we bought our building is a working class neighborhood. The building, it's on a street that is in the midst of undergoing, redevelopment.
gentrified.
Um, and the demographic is a younger demographic. It's more working class. It's smaller homes that are starter homes, whereas the first restaurant that we were in was in an affluent neighborhood in a upscale multi like retail environment. Um, a well-heeled clientele, older clientele, like 50s and up. Whereas the new location that we bought, like I said, is just a totally different animal, and we had not yet built a huge database of those people. We had not yet earned their loyalty, and so thankfully during COVID, we were able to leverage our existing clientele to come and support us while we tried to to build that new audience. So we were lucky for that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard this before on calls with other business owners, but even a few miles makes a big difference demographically, and it can sort of
Sure.
make or break a business. So I'm curious, did how much did you look into the demographics, and how did that factor into your decision of where to put the new concept?
Yeah, I think we were ready for a change, and we had been looking for years before we bought the building. Always just kind of looking at all of the commercial real estate listings, and I think in our heads we really knew that we wanted this to be maybe a little bit of a departure from the organic farm to table. We sort of ended up building a clientele of very uh, discerning people that know their food, know their, products, appreciate organic and well-educated people. And that was all wonderful. But we sort of were like, let's just do something totally different, right? Let's let's just not let's just not do that anymore. Let's do something different. And I think we were just ready for a change, ready to be, maybe a little more relaxed, in a more relaxed environment.
Yeah, a little casual.
And so the new place was like, it really spoke to us because we're like, this is cool. This is more of a neighborhood bar feel. Felt more down to earth. It felt more, like we were sort of just wanted to, maybe in our minds, we were like, yeah, we just wanted to maybe take it easy and back off a little bit, and not be so, um, I think that a lot of energy in our first restaurant was really spent, like it was really about the craft of the food and the sourcing of food, and that is pretty high maintenance. And so we were looking for something a little less maintenance, still high quality, but not to that level. Just something where people could feel like they could come and have a beer and a burger. So
Not pretentious.
right, exactly.
So I'm curious, Ann. I made a joke about this at the beginning of the show, but a lot of restaurants fail. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, having been an owner of a restaurant for 15 plus years now, why do you think that's true? What is it that you know or believe that you think has helped your business survive that maybe people who are considering this might need to know or benefit from knowing?
Yeah. I don't know. I can't speak. I think the reason why so many restaurants fail, and it's never a single reason, right? It's always a combination of probably a lot of different factors. But at the end of the day, the industry itself doesn't lend itself. I mean, the profit margins are, when you think about like maybe a bank at 30 to 40% of like profit margin, restaurants are lucky if you can crack 3 to 5% margin, you know? Um, I think there's so many silent costs in a restaurant that don't get to be built into the food cost and don't get to be built into the menu item price. Because we are kind of forced into a model where people's expectations are that when you go to various places, it all has to look and feel the same. And that price point is there and it's critical because people will kill you if it is too much, if the perception is that it's too high and out of line with the guy down the road or the place that they went the other day that had a burger on the menu. And unfortunately, good, bad, or whatever, it is what it is. You are being, whether you're an independent operator or a big box chain or a drive through or a steakhouse, you're getting thrown into this, you're just being compared all across the board to that. So most people can say, well, if I go to XYZ drive through and I buy a burger for $9 or $8, but then I go to a full sit down restaurant, I can expect to pay more. But a lot of times what you find is that the general public really doesn't see it that way. They really don't see it that way. They really see it like it should all be a $9 burger wherever I go. And so you struggle with that, I think, as a business owner trying to compete. You don't feel like you should have to compete with a big box chain or a drive-through or whatever. But the reality is that you do. You do. If you want your neighborhood people within 2 miles of you to come to you instead of going through the drive-through, you have to do something that's competitive, and it has to be. If it's not price competition, then it better be something incredibly knock your socks off, something else to get them to come in and see that value perception. But that's okay that they can pay more.
Yeah.
And it's a big hurdle. I think that just what we talked about maybe at the beginning of how complicated and how many moving parts there are, and that not every person is built to be a multitasker, and not every person is built. And you can have a great chef and they might produce beautiful food, but they might not have that business acumen or they might not have the tenacity to be that multitasker, to be, plunging the toilet one moment and like, doing QuickBooks the next and like, making a beautiful plate of food and then the next, all within
Of
3 minutes
course,
of each other.
with thorough hand washing in between all of
Right,
those.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think restaurants fail just because of all of those factors. Competition with other restaurants that you really shouldn't be in competition with in the first place, but that you are.
Yeah.
And then just the nature of the people operating it, and then just the industry itself with the thin profit margins. So all of those factors in location, and parking and like everything. There's so many things that can make or break, a deal.
Yeah, it's interesting your comments about the pricing piece because pricing is contextual, right? Like I expect if I'm going to a football game that I'm going to pay $12 for a beer, but if I'm at the grocery store, there's no way I'm paying $12 for that same beer, right? And I know
Yeah,
that those two things are completely separate. I think what you're acknowledging with restaurants is those are a lot closer together in the
yeah,
perception
yeah.
of the people
Mm-hmm.
who come in.
Yeah. And I think in an inflationary environment that we've been in, that we are in, and labor rates the way they are, there's so many pressures on the restaurant, and you've got inflationary pressure, but that the inflationary pressure is also on your customers, and so that if you raise your rates too much to help you purchase the things you need to purchase, your customers are also going to back way up. And we experienced that last we've had a dip. I mean, we've our business has literally been like month over month coming out of COVID was, better, 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 better every month. And when we, you know, really looked carefully at the month over month starting in July of 23, you actually start seeing the monthly revenue go down. And you're freaking out, right? Because you're like,
Yeah.
what's happening? Why is this? Why? And when you're not changing your product, and you have good service, and you have good reviews, and you have, everything else remains consistent. Um, what we sort of concluded was that, and this may be a bit of an excuse, but truly I believe that all of the COVID cash that was, um, that people had, that discretion, that sort of, you know discretionary income was spent freely. And then interest rates went up in July of 23, and I think the COVID cash dried up a little bit for people, and people kind of, whoa, let's put the brakes on a little bit, and let's not be spending so much. Maybe not going out every other night or every once a week. Maybe we have to back it off to once every 2 weeks or something like that. But we felt it, especially in our working class neighborhood.
Yeah, I can imagine that's true, right? When you think about not only the cost of interest, but even, for COVID for a while, I think we benefited from the fact that people just weren't spending money to travel. So when you have a business who's not primarily in a touristy location, you probably actually do
Mhm.
better during that time as opposed to, I mean, the restaurants and
Yeah.
tourist locations were decimated during parts of COVID because no one
Yeah.
was coming.
That's right. That's true. I think a lot of people sort of were like, "Hey, let's travel now," and then they're like, the neighborhood's empty, because
Yeah,
everybody in Minnesota, we have a phenomenon where people go up north, and it's you leave the city and you go to northern Minnesota where all the cabins are and where all the lakes are,
yeah,
and so we experience that every summer as well. So
yeah. In the
it's
summer, in the
yeah,
winter, you go south
yes,
because Minnesota is very cold.
yeah,
It's making a lot of sense to me, Anne, why strategically you wanted to buy the underlying real estate because you're saying, hey, we recognize that we are in a low margin business. And so that makes us susceptible to these economic shocks that can happen. And so was part of the justification that, hey, if we really want to build something for the long term that's going to grow our value here, we need to have something else layered on top of this. And
yeah.
that's the real estate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that Well, and we still believe this, is that restaurant work is very physical and demanding from a physical perspective. And we always kind of knew, like, this isn't, I don't want to be doing this when I'm 60. Like, I really don't. And I don't want to, and neither does Robert, it's hard on your body. And so part of us was also like, let's own something so that we can either kind of like start rolling ourselves out of it, and maybe either people on our staff want to take over, or we find another chef who wants to come in and do something, and we can rent this building out and hold this as an asset, and and then move on to do something else ourselves that's not as physically demanding. So,
So let's talk about the future. What are your plans? I know this may be a tough question if you're dealing with sort of the interim from July where you're trying to figure out what's going on with the current demand and volume, but
yeah.
how are you
Well, I
thinking
mean,
about the next 5 to 10 years?
we do have the business we have it for sale right now. We
Oh,
have it
okay.
listed for sale. And so we're looking at implementing this plan of kind of rolling out and getting out, and moving on. It's we'll see what happens. I don't know with the current environment of where things are at. Well, I'll say this: when we put the building on the market, interest rates were still pretty low before things kind of took off the way they did. So it's been on the market quite a while. So
Business or the real estate or both?
both,
Both.
both. Hmm. Um, so we don't, we're sort of in a phase right now where we're pretty realistic about, okay, who knows how long this could take forever, right? Like this
Yeah.
could be on the market forever, right? We don't know what's going to happen. Um, but I think that, very candidly, the whole events of all of the events of COVID and the aftermath of that, and it really it 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 brought restaurant ownership to a sort of a new level, and it was like not only the normal, craziness of it, and just the exhaustion of it, but then you layer that on top of it. And I don't think we knew until literally like, a year or so ago, where we're like, wow, you'd kind of start taking stock of what just happened. You're like,
Yeah.
this really did a number on us. And, I think so much has changed, and in the industry, and so much has changed just in general, that we both feel like it might be time for us to kind of exit out of the out of this, because you need a lot of energy. Like you really need like total passion, 110% every day. And your staff deserve that too. Your staff deserve to see you all the time, like at your best. And when you can't bring that to the table, it's like you're killing your own business, right? Like you're just putting a nail in the coffin. So, and we don't want that to happen. We're very cognizant of like, let's not get to the point where, you know, where where
You're
the
so burnt out that you
right,
just can't do it.
right. So, uh,
Well, tell us a little bit about, okay, let's assume sometime in the next 2 or 3 years you sell the business. Then what?
mhm, yeah. Or
Do you
maybe
talk about
May,
that or you try not to?
this May would be good too. Like,
Yeah, or this May. Do you try not to dream about it because you don't want to get too caught up in the outcome? Like what's on the other side?
I think I'm keenly interested in commercial real estate, and would love to just,
Do
if
more of
if
that.
there's an option there to invest in condos, or you know, I would like to buy things that don't require a ton of maintenance, and because we've been there, done that with the restaurant. Um, So that's kind of where my head is at. I think for Robert, it gets a little more challenging. Um, I I could maybe go back into corporate America. I could maybe go back. Uh, I wouldn't go back into government, but I think there's maybe a couple different options for me. For Robert, it might be. I think he's a little more, doesn't quite know how to wrap his head around, like, well, that's not fair. I shouldn't say that. It's more that I think he's like, this is all I've known is cooking,
Yeah.
and being a restaurant person. And I don't have it in me to start another one. And I sure as hell am not going to go back and work for somebody else anymore. So
Yeah,
where
that's
do
a
you go?
difficult conundrum you end up in. Once you taste the freedom, it's hard to let go of it. But
Yeah,
if you're
it
done with the
is.
challenge, if you've done the been there, done that challenge, and because I've seen this with some entrepreneurs as well, when you've been at something for 10 or 15 years, you've learned a lot of the things that are there. And so you still have some of the, stress that happens from time to time with a business, but a lot of the learning is gone that
Yeah,
powered you in those early stages where you felt like you're figuring things out, you're making progress. So it can start to feel a little bit rote. And
yeah.
for a lot of entrepreneurs, they end up then transitioning into something else that's tangential. It sounds for you like you may have found that thing in commercial real estate, like, hey, this was a part of what we did in conjunction with this, and I really like it. I like the concept of it. I like the process of project managing it. Um, but maybe Robert doesn't have clarity on what that is yet.
Yeah, so I think for him that'll, but he has other skills too. So I think he'd be able to, he'll find his way. And so I'm pretty confident about that. Or maybe he hangs on to it and maybe he's the one who drives the restaurant and he just works on kind of pulling himself out, but being more of just an owner as
Yeah,
opposed to an owner operator. Um, it gets a little tricky with the SBA financing to do
yeah.
stuff like that. Like they have a lot of restrictions on subletting and things like that, and so you don't have a lot of freedom there. Um,
You guys
but
got what, maybe 5 years at most left on the SBA loan, or is it longer than that because of the real estate?
um, it's well, there's three different loans all cobbled together, and two of them are on sort of 25-year terms, but
Okay,
with
the real
5 year.
estate-based ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, well, we bought the building actually with our cash from the rollover.
Oh, you bought it directly,
We
100%.
bought,
Okay.
yep. So the building we own free and clear, but the build out was what was financed.
Yeah, so you use that as the down payment, the hey, we're going to contribute this property in, and then they gave you the
Exactly.
SBA loan and secured it on the real estate, I'm guessing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, there's a creative way to get another person in there to operate it and be less of an operator and more of a owner.
Yeah.
I think that would be something that we would explore.
Yeah, the trick is just finding that kind of person, right? Someone that's a little bit younger that has the energy, looking for that opportunity. But I know
Yeah.
they exist. I have a couple friends who bought businesses when they were in their 20s and 30s doing that. They were
Okay.
looking at a business and they had a lot of energy for it. And the existing owners wanted to sort of transition out and they needed someone that wanted to step in and put that kind of energy to it. And that was how
Okay.
they got their foot in the door.
So it can happen.
It can happen.
It can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You're right. It is a matter of like finding that right person that you feel like, yeah, this person has the skill set. They have the trust is there. Um, that they're not going to ruin it or run it into the ground or whatever.
In fact, isn't there I think there's a format for that with chefs where it's this idea of you sort of bring someone in as an associate chef and you're building a path to ownership for them to
Hmm.
either be able to take over the restaurant at some point or to then
Hmm.
get funded for opening their own
Yeah,
when they're
yeah.
ready.
Yes, it would be wonderful to be able to find that that person or those people for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this podcast can be part of like putting the word out there.
Yeah.
Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're a young chef who
Right.
dreams of owning your own restaurant, this could be your foot
Right.
in the door.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm curious, Anne, if you had someone that you really loved and cared about, like someone close to you and your family, and they came to you and said, I want to open a restaurant business, what would you say to them? Would you be like, don't do it? Or would you have some thoughts for them about how to think about doing it in a way that give them a better chance of success?
No, I mean, I think everybody should just follow their dreams and follow whatever it is you want to do. If you think if that's what you really are passionate about, go for it. I would never discourage anybody from, you know, going through with something, because at the end of the day, even if you fail, you learn huge, you just learn so much. And it's always worthwhile, and it's always a bridge to something different or better. So I would never discourage anybody, I don't think, from starting a restaurant. I think um, I would definitely just have a lot of, like, depending on who it is, if it's somebody that is, that I'm invested in and that I care about, like say my daughter or whatever, I'd be like, I might be a little bit harsher about, about the ins and outs of it. And I don't know. I just think it depends maybe on the person too, like how committed they are, and if they have their own skin in the game, or are they just getting investors? And I think that tends to make a difference as well. I think I've seen a lot of restaurant operators have um, funding from another person, and there's when they don't have any of their own skin in the game, I think that it can um, be one of the variables that can contribute to success or failure.
Yeah. Is that
And
because you think they're too quick to bail when things get hard, or
yep,
something else?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, can't do this. It's just overwhelming. This is
Yeah.
too hard. You know, um, it's it's easier to just bail and get out than it is to, like, for Robert and I, we went all in. We just
Yep.
we went all in. And, when your nest egg of your whole 401k is on the line, and it's like, failure is not an option. It's just not an option at all. And so you work through the night, you work all hours of the day, you you're wearing all kinds of different hats, and it's just like, it's hard, and it's really you want to give up, you do. But you're like, this isn't an option. I'm not going to lose all of what I worked so hard for like 20 other years,
Yeah.
just to watch it go away because I just couldn't hack it for a couple days or something.
So talk about that process. I mean, you guys decided to go all in and essentially double down on this next concept in terms of putting more dollars in and building
Mhm.
the real estate out. How did you think about that decision and what needed to be true? I mean, many people would probably hear you say that and go, "She's crazy. Why on earth would you
Right,
do that?"
right, yeah.
So, well,
I
you're
I
obviously a
am
very smart person with an MBA. So, what were your thoughts? What did you sort of look at as the risk factors, and how did you decide to move forward?
Yeah, the risk. I mean, that's a good one. I'm a huge risk taker, and Robert is way more risk averse. And I think that is a really good point that you brought up about risk, is because I think every business owner should ask themselves, like, what is my risk tolerance? Like, what am I realistically comfortable with as a person to take on or not take on or to lose? And for me, I think I am way more blindly confident in, almost to a, like, it's to a fault of, like, there's no way I can fail. Like, it's almost, Robert calls me arrogant because I'm like, he's like, you know,
Did you tell him you're not arrogant? I'm just a consultant.
he's
That's
like,
how you have to be to survive
you
as a consultant, Robert.
you do, and you have to have this kind of just blind faith that you have what it takes. And I had that faith in him and his abilities. And so I'm like, there's no way this can fail. It just can't. There's no way. And so yeah, I'm a huge risk taker, um and I also saw an opportunity in this neighborhood. It was in the process of flipping, and when we met with the city council, and they had a whole strategic development plan in place for this corridor where our building is. And that's another thing. Things can just, like, I really wholeheartedly believed in the opportunity of this location.
Yeah. Why aren't
The
you thinking
big,
about holding on to the real estate then?
Yeah, I mean, I would, but things are not flipping like they were supposed to.
They're not. It's not moving fast enough.
Not moving fast enough. And the Economic Development Council of the city has all these great plans and had all these great, development stuff. And this goes back to 2018 when we purchased the building. And it was like, oh, this building across the street, yeah, that's going to get flipped. And this place is those buildings are going to get torn down. And the commercial owner is going to rebuild like multi-unit tenant housing with retail on the main floor, and they're going to redo this street, and it's going to be a roundabout. Well, none of that has happened. Absolutely none of that has happened. I'm pretty sure it's because COVID happened and everybody lost their appetite for that development to happen. Interest rates went up, so the property owners that all had all these grandiose ideas for change put the brakes big time on their plans. And I'm sitting here going, well, we invested in this. We believed in this. We were pioneers. Where are you? And so I think that's been a huge disappointment for us, is that the neighborhood hasn't changed as quickly as we were assuming it would based on the plans that were in place. And shame on us for believing, for really putting so much stock into that. But it's just one more of the things that can happen as, in business, I guess, is that plans don't always materialize, right? So
Yeah.
I'm confident that at some point it will, but do we want to wait it out that long? Do we want to? So.
Well, maybe it depends. Right now, those two things are conflated together, right? The business and the real estate. But maybe as you get closer to a plan for what helps you, move away from the business, maybe you start to think differently about the real estate, especially if your goal is to be more in commercial going forward, in which case the goal is not to sell. The goal is to hold, right? And cash flow and build your assets up.
I think that would be the goal. If we had what it takes to if we could, hold on for a little bit longer, I think it would be a little gem to hold on to have that there pay off in about 10, 15 years maybe, but not right now. It doesn't feel like it right now.
Yeah, real estate's a funny thing, right? Because, prices will sit pretty flat for years and years and years, and then things happen where they just jump dramatically. We own a couple of rentals, and one of them's in a vacation destination, and those prices were kind of just inching along for a while. And with something like COVID, that was an external negative shock. They were a huge positive shock for all these vacation-based things. The asset values of those just sort of blew up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how, external things happen and can just kind of like, yeah, things that you don't plan for. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, Ann, is there anything as you think back to what's helped you guys survive over the last 15 years that was really critical? Like if you could give somebody one piece of advice when they're in the planning stage of thinking about becoming a business owner, what's the one piece of advice you would give them about how to set themselves up for success?
Oh man, so many different things, but I think plan out of everything. And then always be ready with a contingency plan and a backup plan, because something will go wrong. It will always go wrong, and it will screw up your plan. But when you have the backup plan or something to fall back on, then it's not as jarring to you as an owner, or jarring to the business, or jarring to your staff. I think that we naively went into the first business with the mindset of like, what, stuff goes wrong? What? Like, why would that happen? Like, why would bad things happen to good people? Like, very naive thinking. Sort of, and maybe it's an age thing too, I don't know, but as you age and you start, and like bad things happen, and stuff breaks all the time, vandalism happens, your place gets broken into, I mean, just anything, you name it. And I think when you steal, if you can go into something kind of like, yeah, I know that's going to happen. That is all going to happen. And I get that that's going to happen. It's going to be a bummer, but I'm going to plan for it and I'm going to build my expectations into it. I'm not going to wish it to happen, but I'm going to just be very planful about it.
Do
I
you have any
think,
examples of a time that you have done that, where you've created a plan for the unexpected and, had some form of the unexpected happen and had something to fall back on?
well, every year we participate in an annual European Christmas market, and that's a 4 week, all in, like outdoor, um, like European food market festival. And we sell our apple strudel and our two other strudels. It's all we sell. And we've done it for 3 years in a row, and it's a huge revenue generator, but it is really, really hard because it's outside in 20-degree temps, and you're
Oh,
lugging food from your kitchen downtown and in your car, and it's crazy. And we have to hire 20 new staff to do it, and it's kind of insane. And um, so you plan those days, but you literally like plan for what does, like what if it's really cold and we can't work? What if the ovens fail? What if like you have to have all these contingency plans. And it's great because you're like this. I mean, it works because it's this like finite time period. It's like 12 days of of
sure.
intensity. And but you're like you really have, and you're in this little 8 by 8 box, and you're generating like, you know, 30 to $40,000 in a weekend of sales. And so it's craziness, but it's like if the Wi-Fi goes down, we're gonna grab our hotspot. If the oven goes down, we're just gonna use our backup generator. Like if this goes down, so you have all these contingency things in place, but that's more of a survival environment.
It's a good example of what you're saying, which is, you've learned through experience the way things can go sideways. And so now you've developed those plans. So if you were doing a new concept, you'd be thinking through what are all the ways that this can go sideways,
Yeah, yeah,
including things now like what would happen if people couldn't come into the restaurant anymore? Oh, we'd have to do
right,
everything ordering online. How would we do that?
right. So I would definitely pass that kind of, you know, advice off to some new person trying to start, like, yeah, build those plans and then test them out and make sure that you are clear on what the backup
Yeah.
is.
Curious, Ann, I know you're in a point in time where, you guys have been burning pretty hard for the last 5 years. Any regrets for you? Anything you would go back and do differently if you could? Would you trade your job back in the world of consulting?
No regrets, really. I do have a little bit of nostalgia for. I really like. I enjoyed my career working in the federal government. I traveled internationally. It's one of those. It doesn't have the level of intensity as the private sector and corporate work. It was more of the pace was easier.
But you also
Um,
said you would never work for the government again. So
well,
help
yeah,
us
I mean,
understand that.
it's boring. It's kind of stagnant and bureaucratic, and that's why I left. Uh,
Got it.
but I think, I don't know, things come full circle, and the grass does always feels greener somewhere else. I think I have nostalgia for, and because I went to grad school, you know, to get my degree in international relations and you know um, international development work, and that was a whole different animal, right? So I have nostalgia for that, and I would easily go back into that arena again. But I don't necessarily regret, doing all the other things or nothing, no regrets, no.
Yeah, I think that makes sense with the human condition, right? When you're feeling frazzled and super busy, you dream of the days where life was simpler and easier. And when life is simple and easy and you're bored, you
Yeah,
dream of when life was exciting and had new challenges it was throwing your way. So,
yeah, yeah. And that was life like pre-children too, and you'd have kids, and that changes a lot too. And
Changes a lot.
yeah, and
In
so
many ways, kids are like a business, right? You have those days where you're like, can I just quit? Can I be done?
yeah, yeah. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. Like they're older now, so it's yeah.
I am convinced children, like businesses, are put on this planet to teach you all the gaps you have in your character and your
Ah,
personality because they will come out and they will keep repeating the lessons until you learn from them.
isn't that the truth? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they probably teach me so much. Yeah.
Well, Anne, I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you. This was
Love
great.
hearing about the restaurant, especially love the idea of the underlying real estate piece. I'm curious to hear where your future goes over the next few years, so
Yeah,
I hope
yeah.
you stay in touch. I'd love to hear more about it.
Likewise. All right. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Create the Life You Want podcast. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to future episodes by clicking the subscribe button, you know where. If you're an aspiring business owner, you may also want to subscribe to the Create the Life You Want newsletter for more inspiration and tips delivered to your inbox every week. You can find the link to that in the show notes, as well as on my personal website, jeremyames.com. If you've already decided you want to start or buy a business, consider exploring your financing options by heading to our sponsor's website at www.guidantfinancial.com. That's Guidant financial.com. See you in the next episode.